In this video, we're going to be going over how to render out the wireframe of your model. So we'll go ahead and use a sphere for the model, just a default sphere. So let's jump into the render tab. And if we render this out, it renders out as expected. We don't see the wireframe on it, but we see it down here. So the reason why you'd want someone to see the wireframe would be like a potential employer. If they've seen this, they're like, yeah, you modeled a ball, good job. But they can't really see the wireframe of it or how it was modeled. So what we can do is we just add this ball material to our sphere, and then we're going to add an item in here. So again, we have a sphere. This sphere has a ball material on it. So now what we're going to do is just click on the material of our object we want to have the wireframe of. Go to Add Layer, go to Special, and grab Wireframe Texture. So two things happen. One, this little thing called Wireframe Texture gets added. It's a little texture node. And up here, you can actually see the wireframe of our model. So right now, this is actually the wireframe that's visible is a little bit thick. Like up here, it's getting really crowded. So what we want to do is just reduce how thick those lines are. So to do this, what we're going to do is just click on this wireframe texture, make sure it's selected, and then we'll get all of these settings up here. So again, if we have something else clicked on, we have a bunch of different things visible in here. There's all these little tabs. So ideally, as soon as you select this, it should go to the properties of the texture layer, but if not, just make sure this is selected, go to properties, go to texture layer, and you get these settings right here. So this one right here, line width, is set to 10 millimeters. Let's knock that down to like 3 millimeters. Hit enter. That makes our line thinner. Other thing, we can change the line color if we want, set it to white. Usually a good way of displaying your model so they can kind of see what's going on with it would be to just have the default color, just have a gray material, have a black line. But the other thing we don't want, is we don't want this little highlight right here. So to get rid of that, we're going to click on the ball material, take this specular amount, and put it to 0. Now this goes away, and we just see what the wireframe of our model looks like. And again, this image, we could now render this out and throw it in Photoshop. So that could be part of our composition render. So here's an example of that shield model with this rendering style on there. I can see the wireframe. We have really clean, evenly spaced polygons. It shows off a good model. So we could hit render on this. It would render out this image. We'd save it as a PNG so there'd be no background, and then this image we could put again into our composition render, and it would just end up looking really nice and have a combination of both. So here's a quick example of that. This is a previous student, Fabian Franz. He has his colored version right here. So he did the sword, the shield, the potion bottle, and then he did a little spell book. And then for an environment, he did like a little tiered hilltop with a little tree trunk and the sword sticking into it. And right here is that wireframe showing it off. So he did some fancy stuff with the grass. So don't really pay attention to that for now. But regardless, we can see the wireframe of all of his assets. Everything's really clean. And then here's just a different way of doing it. So he had the texture applied. So he applied the texture and he applied that wireframe. So we had the wireframe texture, and right in here it just went material, then he dragged and dropped his texture in between the two, and then the wireframe texture was on top. So they kind of stack on top of each other. So this had both. This one really doesn't read as well as this one, but regardless, overall a good composition. And then here's his use of textures right here. So there's one texture kind of in this little square right here, and then his environment he did as a separate texture. So again, all of his assets, all these guys, the book, the sword, the shield, and the potion bottle are all in this first texture. Second texture is just this kind of hilly environment. So again, really good way of breaking this down. And then he's got his name, he named it, and then has his contact information. So just a really good example of kind of what a finished version of this project should look like.